He invented the weapon that won the West. His revolver was carried by Texas Rangers, Union cavalry, and frontier marshals from Kansas to California. Presidents shook his hand. Generals praised his name. The United States government made him one of the wealthiest manufacturers in America. Samuel Colt died at 47 years old, his company teetering on the edge of collapse, his personal finances in ruins, his health destroyed by years of stress and overwork. The man who put a gun in more American hands than anyone before him never got to see what his invention became. And here's the twist that makes this story worth telling. The company he left behind didn't just survive his death, it went on to produce the most iconic handgun in American history, arm 2 world wars, and operate for nearly 2 centuries before a series of corporate decisions as reckless as anything on Wall Street nearly finished what Samuel Colt's death had started. This is the story of Colt, the man, the machine, and the long, complicated legacy of the gun that changed everything. Samuel Colt was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1814. His mother died when he was 7. His father remarried and sent Samuel to work at a textile mill at 11. By 15, he was a sailor, shipped off on a voyage to Calcutta to keep him out of trouble. He was trouble anyway. But on that voyage, staring at the ship's wheels spinning freely in one direction and locking in place in another, something clicked. The mechanism he was watching, a ratchet that advanced and locked, could work for a firearm cylinder. If you could build a revolver that rotated and locked a new chamber into alignment with the barrel on every trigger pull, one man could fire 6 shots without reloading. In 1836, after years of failed demonstrations, borrowed money, and patent battles, Samuel Colt received his first American patent for the revolver. He was 21 years old. He opened a factory in Paterson, New Jersey, and began manufacturing. The guns were elegant, beautifully made, and almost completely ignored by the U.S. military, which saw no practical need for a repeating handgun. By 1842, the Paterson factory was closed, bankrupt. Colt was 28 years old with a revolutionary invention, a dissolved company, and no money. Most men would have stopped there. Colt went looking for his next bet. That willingness to keep going, to stay in the fight when every reasonable person would have quit, is what makes Samuel Colt worth understanding. Because the failure at Paterson wasn't the end. It was the setup for everything that followed, and what followed would change the history of the American West forever. In 1845, a Texas Ranger captain named Samuel Walker reached out to Samuel Colt with a proposition. Walker had used Paterson revolvers fighting Comanche warriors in Texas and had seen exactly what a repeating handgun could do in a cavalry fight. He also knew exactly what needed to be fixed. The two men collaborated on a new design, the Walker Colt. Heavier, more powerful, and more reliable than the Paterson. The U.S. Army ordered 1,000 of them for the Mexican-American War. It was the largest single government firearms contract in American history to that point. Colt didn't have a factory. He contracted with Eli Whitney, Jr. to manufacture the guns, but the contract gave him the capital and the credibility to start again. In 1847, he opened a new factory in Hartford, Connecticut, the city where he had been born, the city that would bear his name for the next century and a half. The timing could not have been better. The California gold rush of 1848 sent hundreds of thousands of men into wild, lawless territory where a reliable sidearm was not a luxury, it was survival. The Colt revolver was exactly what they needed. Sales exploded. The Hartford factory expanded, then expanded again. By the mid-1850s, Samuel Colt was operating the largest private armory in the world. He had pioneered the use of precision machinery to manufacture interchangeable parts, a manufacturing revolution that would influence American industry for generations. His factory employed over 1,000 workers. He was building not just guns, but a company town around them, worker housing, a church, a park. The man who had been bankrupt at 28 was now one of the wealthiest industrialists in America. And then, just as everything he had built was reaching its peak, his body started failing. The Civil War should have been Samuel Colt's greatest triumph. When the war broke out in 1861, the U.S. Army needed revolvers in quantities no one had ever produced before. Colt's Hartford factory was the only facility in the country capable of meeting that demand. Government contracts poured in. The factory ran day and night, but Samuel Colt was already dying. Years of relentless work, constant financial pressure, and a lifestyle that left little room for rest had broken his health. He was suffering from inflammatory rheumatism, a condition that made every day a physical ordeal. He kept working anyway, driving himself through negotiations, factory expansions, and contract fulfillments that would have exhausted a healthy man half his age. On January 10, 1862, Samuel Colt died in Hartford. He was 47 years old. The Civil War he had armed was less than a year old. The model 1851 Navy revolver that bore his name was being carried by soldiers on both sides of the conflict. His factory was running at full capacity, and Samuel Colt was gone. He left behind a business worth millions, but also a tangle of personal debts, family obligations, and unresolved financial complications that had been building for years. The man who had generated more revenue than most governments spent his entire life one step ahead of the next crisis. He never fully escaped the instability that had defined his early years. He just scaled it up. His wife Elizabeth took control of the company. Against the expectations of nearly everyone around her, she ran it brilliantly, shepherding Colt through the remainder of the Civil War, stabilizing the finances, and positioning the company for what came next. Without Elizabeth Colt, there may not have been a Colt manufacturing company by 1870. History rarely gives her the credit she deserves. 3 years after Samuel Colt's death, the Civil War ended. The frontier opened, and in 1873, Colt released the single-action Army revolver, the gun that would become known as the Peacemaker, the gun that won the West, the most iconic handgun in American history. The timing was perfect. The Transcontinental Railroad was pushing civilization into territory that hadn't seen law enforcement. Cowboys, lawmen, outlaws, and settlers all needed a reliable sidearm. The single-action Army was chambered in the same cartridge as the Army's standard rifle, which meant ammunition was interchangeable. It was accurate, durable, and simple enough to be maintained by anyone. Wyatt Earp carried one. Pat Garrett carried one. Buffalo Bill made it famous in his Wild West shows across America and Europe. The Peacemaker became so embedded in the mythology of the American West that it's difficult today to imagine one without the other. Samuel Colt never saw any of it. He invented the mechanism that made it possible, built the factory that produced it, and trained the workforce that refined it. But the gun that defined his legacy was designed and released 11 years after he was buried. That's the particular cruelty of Samuel Colt's story. He spent his life building something that only fully bloomed after he was gone. For the next century, Colt navigated everything American history could throw at it. Both world wars generated massive government contracts. The 1911 pistol, designed by John Browning and manufactured by Colt, became the standard sidearm of the U.S. military for over 70 years. The M16 rifle, which Colt licensed and produced for Vietnam-era forces, kept the company at the center of American military procurement. But by the 1980s, the same forces that would later destroy Remington were circling Colt. Labor disputes crippled production. A strike in 1986 lasted nearly 5 years and nearly ended the company. The government contracts that had sustained Colt for decades began flowing to competitors. In 1992, Colt filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It emerged, reorganized, and struggled forward. A second bankruptcy came in 2015. Through it all, 2 bankruptcies, multiple ownership changes, factory relocations, and decades of corporate mismanagement, the single-action Army revolver kept being produced. The 1911 kept being manufactured. The Peacemaker, released in 1873, is still in the Colt catalog today. There's something almost poetic about that. Every executive who mismanaged Colt, every hedge fund that leveraged it, every accountant who prioritized short-term extraction over long-term craft, none of them could kill what Samuel Colt built. Because the thing he built was never really just a company. It was an idea. That one man with one cylinder and one patent could arm a nation. Today, Colt is owned by CZ Group, a Czech firearms manufacturer that acquired it in 2021. Production continues in Connecticut, not far from where Samuel Colt built his first Hartford factory in 1847. The 1911, the single-action Army, and the Peacemaker are still being made. But the man who started all of it, the teenager who stared at a ship's wheel in the Indian Ocean and saw a revolution in it, died at 47, exhausted and financially unresolved, never knowing that his name would still be stamped on American steel 160 years later. Samuel Colt didn't just invent a gun. He invented the idea that American manufacturing could be precise, scalable, and world-changing, that a kid from a Connecticut mill town with nothing but an idea and the refusal to quit could reshape the way the entire world fought, worked, and survived. He deserved to see it. He didn't get to. That's the part of the Colt story nobody tells you. Not the peacemaker, not the 1911, not the Wild West mythology. Just a man who gave everything he had to build something that outlasted him by nearly 2 centuries and never got to rest long enough to enjoy a single day of it. If this one hit different, drop a comment with the first Colt you ever held or fired. I want to hear it. And if you want more stories about the builders, the visionaries, and the American brands that changed history, subscribe and ring the bell.